welcoming to the stage Tammy Ryan.
Everyone, it's great to be with all of you and so great to have y'all in Dallas, Texas this week. My name is Tammy Ryan, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's session. So a little bit about me. I have an amazing husband, Alex, of 29 years, and 3 incredible children. My oldest, Nicholas, is out of college and living his best life out of the house permanently. Jonathan is 20, attending college, and so is our Alexa, who's 19, who's attending college at Howard University, and she's studying to be a research scientist. Yay! Alex and I do a little house flipping business here in Dallas, which is just one of the many things that keeps me busy. I was diagnosed with MS about 17 years ago, and when I was diagnosed, instead of asking why, I asked what. I knew I needed to transition to something that gave me purpose. Within 6 months of my diagnosis, I was volunteering for the MS Society. I've always said, as long as MS is a lifelong disease, so is my role as a volunteer and fundraiser. As we've heard this week, a cure is everything. And I hope you've been inspired, as I have been, by the progress we've made making it together. When Sylvia Laurie founded the MS Society in 1946, very little was known about multiple sclerosis. Since then, the Society has paved the way for every effective MS treatment available today. So before we close out our time together, we're going to hear more about innovation in the MS movement, because innovation is what drives our movement. But today is Veterans Day, so before we get into our last session of the Society's Leadership Conference, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge my favorite veteran, my dad, Charles. He was a private first class in the U.S. Army and proudly served in Vietnam. He taught me what service looks like and made a huge impact on my life. While everyone knows me as Tammy, my official name is Tamiko, which my dad chose to remind him of his service. It means beautiful child. In addition to their tremendous service to our great nation, we also owe a huge debt of gratitude to our veterans for their contributions to the MS movement. The prevalence of veterans with MS has increased in recent years. In 2019, a report shows that the rate of MS among veterans using the VA healthcare system increased from 141 per 100,000 veterans in 1999 to 262 per 100,000 veterans. Thanks to information from the VA, researchers have been able to make incredible discoveries. Recently, thanks to veterans, researchers were able to identify that the Epstein-Barr virus is a trigger for MS, which has led to promising progress in MS prevention. So now more than ever, it's critical to be there for those who have been there for us. The Society is proud to partner with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Paralyzed Veterans of America to offer the connections, information, resources, and support our veterans with MS need and deserve. The Society produced a quarterly Ask an MS Expert session with information specifically for our veterans living with MS. I want to ask any veterans and any veteran spouses to please stand or wave. We are so grateful for your service. Now it's my pleasure to introduce a true pioneer to the MS community. Dr. Wright not only treats people with MS in clinical trials, he also leads several clinical studies focusing on MS as a lead investigator at the National Institute of Health. Please help me welcome to the stage Dr. Danny Wright.
Morning, everyone. I'm so pleased to be with you today. We've seen so much innovation in the field of MS research, but we have so much more to do. To set the stage, it's important to understand that we've gotten really good over the past 20 years at modifying the circulating immune system, that's the immune system in our blood and lymph nodes, in order to treat MS as much as we can treat it today. This has been really effective in reducing the number of relapses that people have and getting people back to work and back to their lives early in the disease. But we need to move beyond thinking about how we modify the circulating immune system if we want to change the course of progressive MS. And to do this, we've begun to shift our focus to what can we do inside the brain and the spinal cord. And so in the last 10 years, we began to understand more about how the immune system interacts with the nerve cells and the cells in the brain that support the nerve cells, which we call glial cells, as well as the brain's own immune system. It's interesting, the brain has its own immune defense system, and it's much more sophisticated than we used to think. And so all of these players are interacting from day one when someone develops MS. We've learned a lot in the past 10 years, and there's a lot more we need to learn about how this works. And we've been thinking about how do we get early signals that a new treatment approach might work inside the brain. And the more we've been able to measure that, the more we're able to measure that, the faster we can get it into people's lives. In our traditional MS treatments, we do small clinical trials that rely on MRI measures. We measure contrast-enhancing lesions or plaques, and when people develop these plaques, they may relapse. And we know that if we can stop the new plaques from forming as we see them on MRI, we've got an effective therapy that can also block relapses. And then we go out and we do the big phase 3 clinical trials with thousands of people and confirm that it works, and also tell us, really importantly, if the treatment is safe. We've made real progress in treating relapses, but we also need to stop the attacks, and then we need to repair the damage. And unfortunately, the therapies we have are really good at stopping the relapses, but they're not so good at taking on inflammation that's trapped inside the brain, which is a major barrier to repair. So we've used our most powerful MRI systems, which use very strong but safe magnetic fields, 7 Tesla, much stronger than what you can get in the clinic, to take really detailed pictures of what's going on there. So we found, for example, that when we see a dark rim at the edge of a plaque, we can infer that there are immune cells that have iron in them, and that this is a marker for inflammation that hasn't properly resolved. And that ongoing or smoldering inflammation is associated with failure to repair the myelin that was damaged at the time of relapse. We're also learning how to image myelin, demyelination, remyelination, more accurately and reproducibly, so that we can test new therapies for repair in much the same way that we test therapies that block plaques and relapses. And we're comparing what we can see with the MRI to what we can measure in the blood and in the spinal fluid. Putting all this together is what we need to make real progress toward understanding as early as possible whether a new treatment is working or not. And that's exactly what we're doing now at the NIH hospital, the National Institutes of Health, which is just outside of Washington, D.C., where I work. We're using our advanced imaging to do 3 small clinical trials that will teach us not just about whether the specific medicines that we're testing can reduce inflammation that's trapped in the brain, but also, crucially, how to do the next set of clinical trials even better, even more efficiently. We've made so much progress. I'm excited that we're beginning to answer fundamental questions that lead toward treatments for these unmet needs, and I'm really happy to have had the chance to share that excitement with you today. And so now I'm pleased to introduce my fellow Barancik Prize winner, Dr. Amit Bar-Or, to tell you a little bit about his own fascinating and truly innovative research.
I'm Amit Bar-Or, a neurologist and neuroimmunologist at the University of Pennsylvania. Over the years, our research has been able to contribute to the evolving understanding that people with MS, although we consider them having the same condition, experience MS very differently. So one of the aspects of innovation that the field has benefited from, and we've had some opportunity to contribute to, is what is it that we can learn to measure in an accessible sample such as the blood that gives us some meaningful reflection of what's happening elsewhere in the body that's relevant to MS. And there are many medical conditions where blood measurements have proven very useful in terms of diagnosis, in terms of monitoring treatment response, etc. In MS, we're just beginning that process.
I'm Sheil. I am a very talkative, happy person. I have multiple sclerosis. Towards the time that I met Dr. Bar-Or and I researched him, I heard the best things about him. I heard he was patient, I heard he was innovative, and I want a doctor that wants to find the cure.
Gauging a person's immune state, gauging whether the treatment that a person is on is the right one, and if not, which one to switch to. And at some point, can we stop a treatment that a person is on and see that person benefit from durable remission, which means no longer having activity or injury, even without being on a treatment. There's a lot of promise with certain measurements, but the real challenge is that the immune system is complicated and it's different across individuals. Assessing not just a particular type of cell or molecule, but in fact the balance between them is something we've learned is very important, and it's been very gratifying to see how the research that we've been able to carry out in the MS field has cross-informed other fields, just as we've benefited in our research from insights by others with other conditions.
Dr. Bar-Or, you can tell he chose to be an MS doctor or a neurologist because he wants to find a cure. He wants to help the quality of life with his patients. He wants to make sure people feel the best they can possibly feel.
And the prospect of being able to halt MS, to stop MS in its tracks, in many more people than we were able to do before and earlier in the course, means that people who present now and have a diagnosis of MS can realistically have the prospect of living their life with MS as though they don't have MS. And that, I think, is an incredibly important message for people who are faced with such a diagnosis nowadays, and a very different prospect today than there was before.
I think that's hard as a patient too. You expect your doctor to be a superhero, and they're not God. They're not gonna be able to flip a switch. They're not gonna be able to see things that we're not capable of seeing, and they're just working at it and experimenting just like you. But I love that he's experimenting. I love that he cares to listen.
Winning the Baranczyk Prize means a great deal. None of us do what we do for the prizes or the accolades, but especially an award that is vetted by colleagues in the field, by peers, means a great deal, and I think there's no greater honor than being recognized by one's colleagues for the work that we do in trying to advance both our understanding of and our ability to help contribute to better care for individuals living with multiple sclerosis.
No matter how many things I have to ask him and his team around him, it's quick and it's thorough, and I can tell he's genuinely happy for me when I'm doing well, and he doesn't fear for me when I'm not. And that's really remarkable.
That was amazing. And now to share a personal story of the different experiences of MS is top fundraiser Janelle Camacho.
Hello, my name is Janelle Camacho. When I was around 8 years old, my mom was diagnosed with MS. So MS has pretty much been a part of my life from as long as I can remember. At that time, she had 2 small children and worked a full-time job. And all of a sudden at work, she just went blind. At that time, MS wasn't well understood. There were a lot of ambulance trips, a lot of overnight hospital stays, a lot of unknowns, and it was a really hard time for our family. Unfortunately, her disease progressed pretty quickly. She quit working, was a stay-at-home mom at that point, and she really couldn't even take care of her kids. So they would give her 5 to 7 days in the hospital with steroids to tell her to go home and do some bed rest, and wished her good luck. I became a caregiver at a young age because at that point my dad had to work 2 jobs to support our family. We spent a lot of time with her. My grandmother was a huge help, along with all our other family, but we spent a lot of time with my grandmother when my mom was in and out of the hospital. My grandmother's name is Dolores, and she made it a goal to see a cure for MS. This, you have to remember, was back in the 80s, so she was very ambitious. Once the MS Society became a part of our life, we did everything we could to raise money, bring awareness, and volunteer. Grandma made it a goal of hers to raise as much money as she could every year. That was usually about $10,000 to $15,000 with no corporate sponsors. She did her fundraising the old-fashioned way. She did handwritten notes and handwritten addressed envelopes. And that was about 400 hand-addressed envelopes. Her thought was that people pay more attention to things that are handwritten. She'd even keep extra self-addressed envelopes in her purse so that every person that she would run into, every doctor, every civic group she was in a part of, would get a letter. The one time she just stood in front of the post office and handed out envelopes. She said no one was unapproachable. And in more than 30 years, she was able to raise over $300,000 for Walk MS. She's definitely an inspiration. In 2004, about 6 months after the birth of my 3rd child, I woke up one morning and the whole left side of my arm and down my chest was completely numb. MS never even crossed my mind. I figured I'd slept on it wrong, I had a pinched nerve. No. A few weeks later, my mom's worst nightmare came true, and mine, of course. This was all 3 weeks before Christmas. At that point, I had a 6-month-old, a 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old. I received my diagnosis with multiple sclerosis. Grandma was one of the first person I told, except for my husband, of course. And by this time, my husband had gotten to know what MS was about from the time we were married and knew at that point my mom was pretty much in a wheelchair. So that's what my family knew. She was only 52 by that time. I was nursing a newborn, again, 2-year-old and 4-year-old. I was put on steroids. My body couldn't handle them, and I ended up in the hospital. Luckily, my family flew into action, as usual, and helped my husband, who was trying to figure out what the heck he was doing. And then, in my mind, as I'm in the hospital, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, how can I do this? Am I going to go to the same route as my mom and be in a wheelchair right away? But thanks to my mom's diagnosis, too, I was diagnosed very quickly. I also had a neurologist that I had kind of gotten to know because of taking my mom. So I was able to get in with him right away. And able to get on medication within 3 months. This is also thanks to the MS Society, because of all the money they have put into research to develop better treatments for MS. If MS can be caught sooner, people can get on medicine right away, and they have a much better chance of preventing this disease from progressing. Before my mom was 60, she had to go into a nursing home. Unfortunately, we were unable to take care of her. It was really hard for my grandmother, who at that time was 80, and she was able to take care of herself, but now she had a daughter that was in a nursing home. Unfortunately, my mom had passed away too, about 5 years ago. And when that happened, my grandmother made it even more important. I was determined that she had to keep raising money. She continued to walk, she continued to raise money. She was in her 90s at this point and had trouble writing the letters, so I helped her. She still hand-addressed every envelope It took her a couple months, but she was very determined. They had to be hand addressed. We were not allowed to do an Excel spreadsheet and print out labels. That was unacceptable. People will not pay attention if it comes in a letter with a stamp on it. So she was able to make so much difference fundraising, and that helped my treatments compared to my mom's treatments, and that brought her joy. Things that were impossible 5 or 10 years ago are possible now. We're working toward treatments that not only stop MS progression, but repair what's been lost. Hopefully, someday, people like my mom will be able to take care of themselves, walk again, and talk again. I was in my 30s, nearly the same age as my mom when she was diagnosed. And now that I have children, 3 daughters and a son, my daughters are in their 20s, it's my biggest fear that I'm going to pass it to them. Unfortunately, Grandma passed away this past April. But she hand addressed every envelope this year and got it done in February. We stuffed all of them, she was there for that, and she was able to see a lot of donations come in. She was very happy. In fact, literally, the day before she passed away, she was checking her notes to who donated and who still needed to bring in their letters. So I will continue to fundraise. And she didn't, unfortunately, get to see my mom do what she could do, but she was able to see me live a better life than my mother did. So I will continue to fundraise because what I want for that is a cure, not only for me, but for everybody else living with the disease, and I don't want my children to have to say they have MS. So I want to work and finish what Grandma started. Thank you so much.
Wow. A fellow walker, fellow MSer. What an amazing story. Thank you. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Okay, dry your eyes. I'm not going to run my mascara. We're going to get through this because that was an amazing story. Throughout my time with the Society, I've been fortunate enough to captain a Walk MS team, be an activist, host a bike rest stop. Many of you all have hit my stop, and volunteered to speak on stage in front of hundreds of people. I would do just about anything for this mission, except maybe run 100 miles. Yeah, not 100 miles. But luckily, there are committed people who will. Please help me welcome to this pair of friends, advocates, and amazing fundraisers, John Franco and Matthew Porter.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Matthew Porter. I always describe myself as a father, husband, friend, entrepreneur, and a runner. By the time I was diagnosed with MS in 2014, I knew I could run 50 miles. I'd done it before, nonstop. And I was training to run 100 miles. And I was aggravated at the stories that were being told publicly about MS. You know, the father walking down the street with a cane, the mother laying on her side after she just got done with her lumbar puncture. I was honestly angry. I was pissed off. There's no other word for it. The story, it's about a human being being defined by MS. Maybe that would be my future. I could potentially accept that. I couldn't accept that destroying my today because it felt like it was stealing it.
Morning, I'm John Franco, and I found myself in a similar position when I was diagnosed in 2016. After spending almost a year being really depressed, I decided I was going to own my MS diagnosis. It certainly was going to be a part of who I was, but it wasn't going to define me. It was my chance to turn a negative into a positive. So I set out to find some meaning in this disease. I own a marketing agency in St. Louis, and one of my clients saw a story about Matthew, and I figured these are the type of people I need to connect myself and surround myself with. So I reached out, we got coffee. I had done a good amount of fundraising for the MS Society to that point. So I think the light bulb just kind of went off about the impact we could have together. Living with MS could be some of that meaning I was trying to find and could be our fundraising advantage together.
Thanks to John, we had a platform, and we're very fortunate. Our disease is extremely impactful at times. It's not debilitating, though, every day. And that's what propelled us. We felt like we had a responsibility for others and even our future selves. There are a lot of people across the country, especially in our home state of Missouri, that don't have access to the medications they need, or maybe just don't have the means to get what they need, and we wanted to help. In 2020, I visited the state capital, Jefferson City, for Missouri's MS State Action Day. We met with state legislators to advocate for more affordable access to MS medicines and treatments. Too many of the conversations, they were too brief. Assigned to an aide, or I remember once assigned to an intern tucked away in the hallway because she was able to give up 3 minutes for us. And it just felt like we were on another list of people making another ask before us and that there would be people after us. I left there thinking we needed to do something to truly grab the attention of the legislators. We need everybody to pay attention, not just the folks in this room. We need the people who cast votes to hear our challenges, our pain, our hope, and our needs. So I decided I could run from my home in St. Louis to Jefferson City. And I started talking about the idea. I wanted to meet the politician that said, I care about my constituents, I know I want to hear you, but it's no big deal that you ran here from your home in St. Louis, 103 miles away.
Enter the marketer, right? So I heard about Matthew's plan, and I immediately thought, like, how could we turn this into a fundraiser? And I was literally out running one day. I remember where I was in Forest Park in St. Louis. And I texted him, and I was like, hey, man, you want any company on this run? Luckily, he did, and was open to my idea. So what I was thinking, we're running 100 miles. What if we set our goal at $100,000? You know, that's 100 and 100, and just I kind of like the number thing. Again, the marketing brain came into play. I've done a lot of fundraising, but I cannot even begin to describe how blown away I was by the support we got on this run. It was truly support on another level. So we started running at 5 a.m. from Matthew's house, which is on the Katy Trail in Missouri, which the trail takes you straight to Jeff City. It was February 27th. It was super cold, and we ran nonstop to the Capitol to meet with the legislature. I remember senators saying, okay, before we start, I just want to make sure I understand. You ran here from your house? Well, it wasn't my house, it was his house, but yes. In St. Louis, yes. Nonstop? Yes for him, sort of for me. I'll get to that in a second. All in all, we ran right at about 103 miles in 31 hours and raised more than $125,000. It's been important to me to not only change the lives of people with MS, but also to prove to myself that MS won't define me. And I know a lot of people in this room can relate to that. Now, that slight asterisk I was talking about, I had to get off the trail for a small chunk of miles. I truly think, self-diagnosed, but I think I had hypothermia. We were running along the Missouri River. It was so cold in February. And then I also had some blisters that the only thing that worked was just duct tape. So anyway, but I did finish.
All the runners in the room know that duct tape is your friend when you're out there for blisters and all that. So I see the nods in the room, even with the bright lights in front of me. For the record, I ended up with a torn calf muscle about halfway through. If you saw the picture that was up there, you can tell my left leg looks like it's in skinny jeans because it's swollen. My right leg looks normal. But for me, it was defining what MS looks like across the spectrum. It's a raising awareness for that which can be visible and the invisible. I've answered questions for a lot of people in my time being diagnosed and being public about it. They ask me all the stuff you can imagine. And everybody here that has MS is going to start nodding their head because they've been asked these same questions. What were my JCV levels? What was my vitamin D level? What treatments am I on? What treatments have I been on? How many lesions did I have? How many lesions do I have? Did I have my MRI? How often? With contrast? With and without contrast? How long were you in the tube? But nobody to me, in all the times that I've started talking to people newly diagnosed, from a 14-year-old girl up to a 55-year-old man, has ever asked the right question first. And to me, that question is, how do you fight? Every day, all day. And to me, that is the question of why I do what I do. What is today? What is tomorrow? And to me, part of that fight is figuring out how I could take that fight beyond just what is in my circle. Because I want to do the extraordinary today in hopes that I and all of us can do the ordinary in 20 years.
So our challenge to you all is to think about how you can take this fight beyond your circle of influence. Who can you partner with? Who can you reach out to? What can you accomplish? My advice to anyone who wants to contribute to this movement, and we need everyone in this room and everyone we know to contribute to this movement, is don't ignore the power of your story. Don't ignore the power of your own voice.
So we've been here 3 days. Many of you may not remember everything you heard. What you will remember is how you felt. That is actually what you need to take forward. And how people feel is what gets them to make that contribution. It's what cements that memory. It's what moves this effort forward for all of us. So we're going to ask you that you spend some time brainstorming right here in this room, the next 15 minutes, surrounded by the people at your table. Reflect on what you've heard during the time together the past 3 days, and what you can do this year. What can you do to still make a difference? Who can you ask? Who can you make pay attention? And do that, irrespective of the cost. All right? Who wants to get started? Ready?
Which way do we go?
All right, everyone, pencils down. I hope you had a great conversation. The work you're doing is incredible, and it makes a difference. I'm inspired by your passion and your commitment, by your willingness to write letters, run, advocate, volunteer. We all have a story to tell and a platform. We have a role to play, whether it's as a fundraiser, a donor, an MS activist, self-help group leader, researcher, staff member, or volunteer. You are a part of the National MS Society, and we need you. It will take all of us to reach a world free of MS. So this year, along with 2 of my dear friends, I'm going to add my voice to the conversation by launching my very own podcast, The Diverse Collective. We want to use our life experiences to help others in an impactful and positive way. We've come together to share our journey with a purpose. Every connection is meaningful. Every story is worth hearing and can change someone else's life. I love that the theme of this conference is "A cure is everything." Just as the experience of MS is unique, every person's cure may look different. But we're going to cure this disease for every single person. We all have different experiences and networks, So imagine what we can accomplish together. This week has been incredible. I hope you're leaving with new skills, new information, and a renewed sense of purpose. As you head home today, think about what you heard this week. Think about what you committed to do this year, and let that be an inspiration to move you. What will your legacy to the MS movement be? What can you do in the next year that will be a gift to the next generation? How can you prevent someone else from hearing those words, "You have multiple sclerosis"? Thank you all so much for being here. Safe travels. You know, we do everything bigger in Texas, right? So of course, we're gonna do it with a big send-off. Hit it, Wildcats!